Despite the long-forgotten nature and complexity of the matter, it is worth trying to understand what exactly caused the great powers of Denmark and Prussia to clash in not one but two back-to-back wars. At the center of everything stood what was known as the Schleswig-Holstein Question, a diplomatic puzzle that confused politicians and historians for decades. It was not a simple border quarrel but a dispute entangled with law, tradition, ethnicity, and nationalism that pulled in neighboring powers and reshaped Northern Europe.
The origins of the problem reach far back in time.
The Duchy of Schleswig had for centuries been tied in some way to the Danish crown. Holstein, by contrast, had belonged to the mosaic of territories that once made up the Holy Roman Empire. Yet beginning in the year 1460, both duchies came under the authority of the same duke, who also happened to be the King of Denmark thanks to the Treaty of Ribe. This arrangement seemed workable, but one particular clause in the treaty later became a thorn in the side of Denmark. The clause implied, under a German interpretation, that the two duchies must remain forever undivided. To German nationalists, this meant Schleswig and Holstein were bound together as one entity and could never be separated politically. To the Danes, however, it meant something very different. Centuries passed, and the situation grew more complicated with the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire and the creation of the German Confederation in the early 19th century. Holstein became a member of this new confederation, while Schleswig remained outside. By then, both duchies were heavily populated by German speakers, and German culture had taken root there. This meant that when King Frederick VII of Denmark announced new plans to tie Schleswig more closely to Denmark, he was met with resistance. Many of the duchy's inhabitants wanted instead to see Schleswig and Holstein lean toward the German Confederation. The difference in political systems between the Danish kingdom and the duchies added fuel to the fire. On top of that, the rise of 19th-century nationalism sharpened ethnic and linguistic divisions. By 1848, these tensions erupted into open rebellion. The immediate spark was the refusal of King Frederick to recognize Schleswig and Holstein as a joint German state. He admitted Holstein's membership in the Confederation, but he would not allow the same status for Schleswig. His defiance led to a rising in both duchies. Rebels seized the fortress at Rendsburg and gathered their militia. They then marched on the city of Flensburg, which they occupied briefly. The Danish army struck back swiftly and retook the town within 2 weeks. At this point, the rebels received outside help. Prussia sent troops to support them, and on April 23 at the Battle of Schleswig the Prussians defeated the Danish forces. For a while it looked as though the German side had the upper hand. Yet Denmark rallied and turned the tide in the Battle of Sundeved in May, where they regained ground. A back-and-forth struggle followed, but the larger European powers did not wish to see the conflict spiral. Pressure from abroad forced the belligerents to consider negotiation. In August 1848, the Armistice of Malmö was signed under the watch of Russia and other powers. The truce was largely favorable to Denmark. Yet it did not settle the root issue. The following year, the London Conference attempted to hammer out a permanent solution, but Denmark resisted and talks collapsed. Fighting resumed in the spring of 1849. Once again Denmark scored battlefield victories, but once again the Schleswig-Holstein question remained unanswered. Finally, in May 1852, the London Protocol was signed by the major European powers. This agreement declared that Schleswig and Holstein would remain under the Danish crown but would retain independence in their own affairs. To the outside world this looked like a solution, but to the Germans it was unsatisfactory. Many still felt the duchies belonged within the German national orbit and resented Denmark's continued control. The compromise satisfied no one completely, and the peace was only temporary. The interwar years proved short. When King Frederick VII died in 1863, his successor Christian IX enacted the November Constitution, which attempted to integrate Schleswig more tightly with Denmark in direct violation of the London Protocol. To German eyes, this was unacceptable. On February 1, 1864, combined Prussian and Austrian forces crossed into Schleswig, launching the Second Schleswig War. This new conflict echoed the first but unfolded on an even larger scale. Prussian and Austrian troops brought modern weapons and better organization. The Danish army, though brave, could not withstand the combined assault. After several hard-fought battles, Denmark faced defeat. By October 1864, the Treaty of Vienna ended the war. Denmark was forced to surrender Schleswig-Holstein and Lauenburg. Schleswig and Lauenburg passed to Prussia, while Holstein went to Austria. This settlement finally answered the Schleswig-Holstein question, at least for the time being. Denmark lost nearly 40% of its territory and a third of its population. For the Danes, it was a national tragedy remembered as one of the darkest chapters in their history. For the Germans, it was a step toward unity under Prussia. Yet even this arrangement did not last long. The division of spoils between Austria and Prussia soon bred new tensions that erupted in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866. For the people who lived in the duchies, the change of rule meant choices. Ethnic Danes who wished to remain Danish were given 6 years to leave and return to Denmark. Many chose to do so, though others stayed and adjusted to life under Prussian or Austrian rule. Ethnic Germans, by contrast, generally welcomed the change, seeing it as liberation from Danish dominance. So when we look back, the Dano-Prussian conflict was not a single war but a series of wars, negotiations, and diplomatic crises that lasted for decades. At its heart was the question of whether Schleswig and Holstein should belong to Denmark or to Germany, and whether they should remain united or divided. Around this core question swirled the ambitions of Prussia, the interests of Austria, the concerns of Britain and Russia, and the hopes of nationalists on both sides. Lord Palmerston once remarked that only 3 people had ever truly understood the Schleswig-Holstein question, one of whom was dead, the other had gone mad, and the third had forgotten it all. His famous quip shows just how tangled the matter was even for statesmen of the time. But from a distance we can see that it was a struggle of identity, sovereignty, and power at a critical moment in European history. The outcome reshaped Denmark, permanently reducing its role in continental affairs and forcing it to turn inward as a smaller nation. For Prussia, the victory strengthened its position within Germany and set the stage for future wars of unification. The Schleswig-Holstein question may sound obscure today, but it was one of the sparks that ignited the broader conflicts, leading to the rise of a united Germany. Thus, what began as a medieval treaty clause in 1460 spiraled into rebellions, wars, and international diplomacy 4 centuries later. It shows how old legal formulas and ethnic boundaries could become flashpoints when combined with the forces of nationalism. The duchies themselves were not vast territories, yet they drew the attention of Europe because they symbolized the clash between Danish tradition and German ambition. The Danes fought bravely, but the tide of history was against them. Their defeat in 1864 remains a defining memory of loss, while for Prussia it was a triumph on the road to dominance. The Schleswig-Holstein question was finally answered on paper, but it left scars that endured for generations. In the end, the Dano-Prussian conflict was not simple at all. It was a reminder that in 19th-century Europe no issue of borders or sovereignty could be treated in isolation. Every step Denmark took touched the nerves of the German Confederation. Every move by Prussia alarmed Britain or Russia. Small duchies became great questions because they sat at the crossroads of empires and national identities. The wars may have ended in treaties, but the legacy of Schleswig and Holstein endured, shaping identities on both sides of the border. And even though Lord Palmerston joked that no one could fully understand the matter, the essential story is clear. Denmark and Prussia clashed again and again because each side claimed the duchies as their own, and neither was willing to yield until war decided the matter.